This is the 5-minute guide to the armored cruiser Georgios Averof of the Hellenic, or Greek, Navy. The Georgios Averof is often described as a battleship when in fact it is an armored cruiser. It was to play a key role in Greek history in the early part of the 20th century. At the end of the 19th century, both Greece and its traditional enemy, the Ottoman Empire, possessed small fleets that were rapidly becoming obsolete. To try and fix this problem on limited funds, the Greeks bought 5 destroyers, but this would still leave them at a disadvantage, since their capital ships consisted of 3 old and slow coastal defense battleships that were more ironclad than pre-dreadnought. Whilst the Ottoman Navy was hardly a shining light of modern ship design, they had purchased a number of older German pre-dreadnoughts that gave them an advantage in speed, firepower and protection over the Greek ships. At this point in Italy, the Italian Navy was building a trio of armored cruisers of the Pisa class, but had decided to cancel one of them. Although the Greek Navy did not have enough money, it turned out a patriotic Greek citizen did, and he stepped in with most of the down payment on the ship. As a result, the ship was named after the benefactor and became the Georgios Averof. Whilst the Pisa class was of Italian design, the Greeks began to customize their ship with all sorts of interesting bits of technology. In the end, the ship had an Italian hull and engines, French boilers, German generators and British guns. When she was completed, the armored cruiser had been superseded by the battle cruiser in the major navies, but it compared well with the last generation armored cruisers. With 4 9.2-inch guns into twin turrets, 8 7.5-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, a pair on each side, along with 16 single 3-inch guns, 4 single 47mm guns and 3 torpedo tubes. Her broadside was only 1 7.5-inch gun less than the Royal Navy's Minotaur class armored cruiser, but with better concentration of fire thanks to the use of twin, rather than single turrets. With a top speed of just over 23 knots and a 7.9-inch thick armor belt, her protection level was close to some of the lighter pre-dreadnought battleships, and with her long-barreled main armament she could actually outrange the heavier guns of the Ottoman battleships, as well as being significantly faster. After a rather poor start in career due to an inadequate captain, that included running aground off the British coast and a near mutiny over blue cheese of all things, the ship returned to Greece and began to get its act together. In the Balkan Wars, which immediately preceded the First World War, the ship led 2 major fleet battles against the Ottoman forces. At the Battle of Ely at the end of 1912, the ship used its vastly superior speed to break away and cross the front of the enemy fleet alone, concentrating fire on the Ottoman flagship and force the enemy fleet to retreat in disorder. About a month later, at the Battle of Lemnos, there was a more traditional gunnery duel, with the Greek forces aggressively closing the range, but the ship again came into its own as the enemy retreated, since it was able to follow and use the guns on both sides to keep up the pressure and compel the Ottoman fleet to maintain its withdrawal. By shutting the Ottoman fleet out of the operational area in these battles, the Greek fleet ensured naval superiority, which contributed significantly towards the eventual Ottoman defeat, as without supplies and reinforcement the Ottoman army was severely weakened. The battles also showed the weaknesses of older battleship designs, as the Georgios Averof was equipped with more modern fire control. That meant, although its guns were weaker than the enemy weapons, it was able to actually score meaningful hits as opposed to just murdering the local fish population with near misses. A similar situation had occurred in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, but the lessons of that conflict had apparently not been learned by the Ottoman Navy. In World War I, Greece was initially neutral and the ship didn't do that much, even ending up being seized by the French in 1916 following riots in Athens over Greece's direction in the war. After being returned in 1917, she took part in the Allied fleet's entry to Constantinople at the end of the war. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed immediately after, the ship was back in action in the Greco-Turkish War that lasted from 1919 to 1922. Although this war did not go so well for Greece as a whole, the ship saw good service bombarding enemy positions and later evacuating troops and civilians. From 1925 to 1927 she went through an extensive refit in France and received modern anti-aircraft guns, a new foremast, and improved fire control equipment, and had the obsolete torpedo tubes removed. In the Second World War, after Germany invaded in 1941, the ship's crew were ordered to scuttle her to prevent the ship being used by the Kriegsmarine. But the crew had a better idea and frankly showed a lot more courage than most of the French Navy did in a similar situation. They disobeyed their orders and instead sailed for Crete, joining up with the British fleet and then sailing on to Alexandria in company with whichever Greek and British warships had survived the German air attacks and invasion of the island. However, whilst she had been a top-of-the-line ship in World War I, by now she was slow and underarmed compared to modern cruisers, and in the cauldron of the Mediterranean it was very likely she would be sunk by German or Italian aircraft, and could not keep up with the British fleet. Instead, she took up convoy escort and patrol duties in the Indian Ocean, freeing more modern ships for other operations, since slow merchant convoys meant her speed was not a problem and she would significantly outgun any German, Italian or Japanese raiders that reached that area of the world. At the end of 1944 she was restored as the flagship of the Hellenic Navy and sailed back to Greece to restore the government after the Germans were driven out. She continued as flagship until being decommissioned in 1952. After a long period of floating at anchor, the Greek government decided to restore her as a museum ship in 1984, and you can go and visit the ship today. Like the HMS Victory and USS Constitution, she is still considered as an active service vessel and is well worth a visit as the sole surviving example of an armored cruiser. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship review, leave it below and we will see about adding it to the list.